And it's funny because, I knew more about Tay Gowan coming into the draft last year than I did about Zech McPhearson. I got to be honest. And McPherson went in the fourth round, and Tay Gowan, who I like coming out of Central Florida, went in the sixth round. So, I like Tay Gowan in that spot. I think he's a confident type player, and he could be your starter, especially given the fact that McPherson does play a lot of special teams, and he's pretty good at it. So Gowan could have the leg up. I wouldn't have a problem with that.
You got McMullen, Jody McDonald here with you on Birds 365, and you got a well-caffeinated Ed Kracz joining us here on Birds 365. How are you, Big Ed?
Hey, good morning, guys. I'm doing fantastic. How are you?
Yeah, getting you up early for the big media availability day. So who are you predicting? Jody and I were discussing. I got TJ Edwards. I got a Lando day, maybe a little Landon Dickerson, maybe Quez Watkins as a surprise. We're down the list. What are you thinking, Ed?
You're not predicting Carrick Wheatfall?
Yeah, I'd love to talk to Carrick Wheatfall. Love to get the backstory on that name.
Those are the guys I'd like to talk to. I don't know if people want to read about them, but I'd like to talk to guys, down the depth chart of Devin Allen.
I still want to talk to Carson Strong, Devin Allen. I want to talk to Catherine Raich, by the way.
Well, now
the Eagles hook that up.
You're planning on going to Berea, Ohio before.
Yeah, I'll probably get to talk to Catherine in Berea.
Yeah.
I have talked to Catherine a few times at press boxes. Hello. But the Eagles promised to make her available when she was the highest ranking female football executive in NFL history. It never came to be. Ed Kracz. Still upset about that.
Well, I hope we get Fletcher Cox today. I would.
Yeah, Fletcher's. Yeah, I should.
Haven't had Fletcher yet. All right, here's the one I got to know. This is like pressing. Will Aaron Siposs be available for you two guys today?
Aaron Siposs. That's a good point. Somebody tweeted me that. I think it was Dave Weinberg. I got to get Dave on the show, by the way. So I give Dave a shout out. But he said, I joked the Eagles are 12 deep at receiver, and I put the Eagles 12 receivers down. And Dave tweeted, can any of them punt? I am surprised. There is still no competition for Aaron Siposs. Does that surprise you, Ed Kracz?
Well, I mean, yes and no. Yes, and that Siposs struggled at the end of last year. You'd think some competition would do him good, but no, in the fact that the Eagles just never seem to bring in any extra legs, so to speak, with their kicking game. They did the same with Jake Elliott. They never really brought in any competition, and now they're doing it with Siposs, and they never did it with Donnie Jones and who was the guy that that went to Texas?
Cam Johnston.
Cam Johnson. Yeah.
They did bring in Cam the 1 year. Remember, Cam was here and battling with Donnie Jones his last year, and I guess Donnie won the job because he was a better holder. And then they managed to bring Cam back the next year. That was the 1 year they had some legit competition. But you're right. I mean, they kind of stick with their guys. They should with Jake Elliott. I mean, Jake's coming off a great year.
Yeah. I remember he had his struggles a couple years ago, and there was talk about whether they're going to bring in. They just don't seem to do it. And yet, maybe they will. They have, three? I think they still have 3 open spots on the roster.
I think it's 2 or 3, yeah.
To get to that 90-man limit. So, they could potentially bring in a punter to compete, even to just get some extra, to give Siposs some rest during training camp so he doesn't have to make all the kicks. But with all the machines they have that simulate the punts and the kickoffs, you don't really have to use those guys as often as you probably used to in the past before those machines were invented.
Well, if they've got 2 spots left on the roster for the 90-man, I got to believe they're bringing in at least 1 more wide receiver, maybe 2, but more wide receivers than they know what to do with.
Really?
Somewhat like wide receiver, a position which has depth at least on the roster, but I want to get your take on how it's going to play out when we get down to 53 rather than 90. Ed, they got a lot of tight ends on this roster too. I think they're 7 deep right now at tight end, which wide receivers, you can get 3 of them on the field at the same time, if not 4, if not 5. Yeah, if you got 3 tight end sets, one of them better be basically an offensive lineman. We know who the number 1 tight end is going to be. How big a battle is it going to be between the other 6 for their spots, both on the 53-man roster, the practice squad roster? Do you like where the Eagles are at with tight end right now, Ed?
Yeah, I do. I mean, they drafted one, Grant Calcaterra, and those 13 personnel sets with 3 tight ends doesn't have to be an O lineman. It has in the past. We've seen Siamalu play tight end, when he was first breaking into the league. But yeah, I think they've used 13 last year with Tyree Jackson, Jack Stoll, and Dallas Goedert on the field. So, Stoll being a pretty good blocker in the run game, so you can use him in those sets. But yeah, I like where they are. But you're right, Jody. It's a crowded spot, just like receiver. With Tyree Jackson, he probably won't be ready to start the year. I would expect he'll be on PUP after that late ACL tear. I think that was in Week 18 against the Cowboys. So he'll probably be on PUP. And then after that, you have Grant Calcaterra, you have Richard Rodgers. But yeah, I like where they are at the tight end spot. I think Calcaterra is going to be a very good player for them. I really do. I think he's going to see some time, depending on Tyree Jackson and how his progress is going. But I like Calcaterra in that spot. I think when you look at the impact that these 5 drafted players can make, outside of Nakobe Dean and Jordan Davis, I think Grant Calcaterra could come in and give this team some good snaps as well. In 12 and 13 personnel sets. So I like where they are at tight end for sure. And of course, Dallas Goedert, one of the best in the league.
Yeah. Depth-wise, though, and you never look. I say all the time, you can't legislate injuries, and you have a top 5 tight end. But if Dallas even has a high ankle sprain, he's got to miss a couple, 3, 4 games. I'm not in love with that depth. In other words, I'm with you in that long term, the Eagles might be fine at the position with Grant and Tyree Jackson. But for immediacy, if they need somebody to step in for Dallas Goedert, I'm a little concerned with that position.
It's tough to replace a guy that's one of the top 5 or 6 tight ends in the league. No matter who you have. The Eagles were blessed with Ertz and Goddard on the same roster for a number of years, and you don't have that situation. But I think they could get through. And Dallas does struggle sometimes staying healthy for a full season. He'll get some nicks and bruises, but I think they can get through in a short-term situation with Jack Stoll. And Tyree Jackson, perhaps, and Calcaterra. And then, like we mentioned, Richard Rodgers is a veteran who's been doing it a long time. And when they needed him a couple of years ago, he had a great 3 or 4 game stretch where he caught passes and added yards. Now he's a little older, but he's still a veteran guy that, could step in and give you, a month's worth of work if Dallas were to miss some time. So I would have liked to have seen them sign the tryout Penn State basketball player.
Yeah, that would have been it. They still got 2 spots. That's a nice story.
Well, they could add another tight end, the receiving tight end. They want guys who can catch balls in these joint practices that they're scheduling. So wouldn't be surprised if they sign another tight end. Johnny, and I do want to ask you this, and I'll readily admit ahead of time, difficult question. I have no idea what the answer would be, but I'm just spitballing off the top of my head. How many teams in the NFL, if they lose their number 1 tight end, don't fall prey to, all of a sudden our depth isn't good enough? How many teams in the NFL right now have a tight end 1 and a tight end 1A? But the guy who's backing up your starter is not that bad a drop off. I think that's basically 30 out of the other 31 teams in the National Football League. I don't know if too many teams.
Well, it might have been the Eagles with Goddard and Ertz, but I hear what you're saying. But that's not my concern. Look, obviously, when you lose a top 5 player, you're not going to replace him with a top 5 player unless pure luck and you got somebody who's a superstar in waiting that you don't think that needs some time or whatever. My concern is the level of drop-off. I think a lot of those teams, the level of drop-off is not as drastic as it is in Philadelphia. But yeah, anytime you lose that player, you're not going to replace a Pro Bowl level player with a Pro Bowl level player in general. but there are levels of drop off, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I don't think it's that steep. I don't think it's that steep for the
Right.
Eagles. I really don't. But to answer Jody's question, you might have a better chance naming the backup quarterbacks in the league than you would the backup
the tight ends. I got no idea.
Yeah, who's after Ertz in Arizona?
Who's Kelsey's backup in Kansas City right now? I got no bloody idea. But if Kelsey goes off the field, Chiefs are screwed because there's going to be a drop off. So if you are lucky enough, and you put yourself in position to be lucky enough to have a top 5 tight end, I'd just be thankful for it rather than go, if he gets hurt, we've got this massive drop off.
And that's why I said,
put in there.
Look, now I got to defend myself. And that's why I said you can't legislate injuries. I know that, but there are, levels of drop off. And there are teams who have decent backup tight ends, and I'll go down the list, and there's guys like, Austin Hooper, and think about your Jets, Jody. Your Jets signed the kid from Cincinnati, CJ Uzomah, and Tyler Conklin, who had like 60 catches with Minnesota last year. That's what I'm talking about.
But the Patriots did the same thing, signed 2 tight ends, the big money thing. And what did those tight ends actually give the Patriots?
No, but it's a fair point. But I'm saying that drop off is a hell of a lot less steep than Dallas Goedert to Jack Stoll. Is my only defense.
And it could be Calcaterra. I mean, it could be the Goddard to Calcaterra, and we don't know what Calcaterra is. I mean, certainly he was a rising star in college until the concussions came along, and he had a good season last year with SMU. But talking about tight ends, look down in Dallas. There was a lot of love coming out of their rookie camp for the Wisconsin draft pick Jake Ferguson, and he might get some time with Dalton Schultz in Dallas, and you might see a lot of 12 personnel out of the Cowboys this season. They're missing Amari Cooper now, and they lost.
Yeah,
Cedric Wilson.
They have Dalton Schultz, who's a good tight end, and Blake Jarwin, I think, is still there. So they're pretty good at tight end. We're talking about the Dolphins. We'll get to the joint practices, but they have Mike Gesicki and Durham Smythe. So there are teams with legit backup tight end situations. Look, I'm nitpicking. It's the off season. It's May, Jody. That's what I got to do. I got to nitpick, and I'm concerned about the depth at tight end.
Here's the point we're really driving at more than anything else. We're nitpicking the backup tight end position. Who's their CB2 right now? You're right. There are bigger fish to fry, bigger things to worry about. We're arguing backup tight end. When is Howie going to get himself another starting cornerback across from Big Play Slay? Ed Kracz.
They're going to play 6 of them out on the corner. They're going to play with 14 guys. They're going to play, with an extra 3 cornerbacks.
I missed the memo that they're rewriting the rules that you're allowed to have extra players at cornerback if you're the Eagles because they haven't been able to get their other starter. Damn, they
have their other starter. They'll tell you they have their other starter, but they told you that last year. By the way, my bigger, I think a lot of people say, the Eagles drafted Zech McPhearson in the 4th round last year. At this time last year on this show, we were probably saying that the Eagles were like, well, we're comfortable with Zech McPhearson. We're comfortable with that. We think he can do some things. And then 2 days before camp started, boom, there's Steve Nelson. Never left the field, basically. First play of team drills, starting corner, never left the field. Played the whole season. I think that's going to happen this time around as well. But I'm going to throw this prediction at you, Ed. If the Eagles aren't able to get a veteran corner, I'm betting on Tay Gowan over Zech McPhearson. What do you think?
Yeah, I like Tay Gowan's length. And it's funny because, I knew more about Tay Gowan coming into the draft last year than I did about Zech McPhearson. I got to be honest. And McPhearson went in the 4th round, and Tay Gowan, who I like coming out of Central Florida, went in the 6th round. So, I like Tay Gowan in that spot. I think he's a confident type player, and he could be your starter, especially given the fact that McPhearson does play a lot of special teams, and he's pretty good at it. So Gowan could have the leg up. I wouldn't have a problem with that. I will say, when we talked about the joint practices, or we're going to talk about them. But, the Cleveland Browns have kind of a spare part at cornerback that might interest the Eagles, and Greedy Williams.
I take Greedy.
Yeah. I mean, he could be a guy that, he's an LSU guy. They have a little bit of a history recently with that college. But, they have the front office pieces that are in Cleveland that used to be in Philadelphia with Andrew Berry and Catherine Raish. So, I mean, he could be somebody to keep an eye on once summer hits and, teams start to sort out what they have and what they don't have. And, maybe that could be someone to keep an eye on. And the Eagles are playing them, I think, in that kind of that range where it would be good to make a trade. I think it's leading up to the August 21st game. So Greedy Williams could be someone to keep an eye on. He's an spare part in Cleveland, gives them depth. Maybe they don't want to part with him, but who knows? I mean, the Eagles could make a play to try to get Greedy Williams.
Now, speaking of trades, and we've given Howie Roseman a lot of credit here because he earned it, deserved it. He's very good on both leading up to the draft and then draft day with maneuvering and adding and subtracting picks and getting value where he thinks he needs it. We also speculated leading up to the draft that the Eagles had some players on their roster that could potentially be moved. Their backup left tackle is still here, even though there was some pretty good speculation that they might be able to move on from him, even though he's a former number one draft pick. Another former number one draft pick at wide receiver who's had 2 very unproductive years so far, that people were hoping that the fact that they were picked as high as they were could give the Eagles enough impetus to be able to deal them. Will both of those 2 guys still be here by the time the season opens this year, Ed Kracz, or will Howie Roseman be able to work out any kind of deal to move on from former first-round draft pick busts?
Yeah, I think they would like to move on from them, but Howie's just not going to give away 2 former number one picks. He wants what he wants. He's going to get greedy, so to speak, and you can't blame him. I mean,
Get greedy. Get greedy Williams. There we go.
Right. Yeah, I think they would like to probably find a landing place for one of those guys because they talk about spare parts. Greedy Williams in Cleveland. Certainly, Andre Dillard is a spare part, and he can really only play left tackle. I know he's being cross-trained at right tackle, but he's a guy that's pretty limited in where he can play. So. But again, I don't think Howie's going to move on anybody. Now, maybe you can get a third with a conditional, one of those conditional picks, or maybe it can become a second based on, play time or whatever. And the same with Jalen Reagor. There was the report that the Eagles tried to swap him for Chuck Clark, the safety down in Baltimore. But again, I think it just is because Howie wants more than just Chuck Clark. He wants a little bit more for Jalen Reagor.
That's crazy, by the way.
Yeah,
it is.
By
crazy.
the way, if that report is accurate, what the hell is Howie thinking?
Yeah, but I just think he's not going to give up guys that he wants to make sure he recoups, the investment that he made in them just a couple years ago. So unless he's willing to come off of his stance that he'll take a little bit less, he won't move them. But I suspect that at some point when they decide they need a cornerback, because Tay Gowan and Zech McPhearson just aren't good enough, and there's somebody out there that they can get, then they could throw one of those guys in to whatever deal they make in the summer. We saw them do the player-for-player trade with Darby and Jordan Matthews a few years ago. The Eagles had to throw a third-round sweetener in there, but you could see something like that in the summertime. Again, it depends on if Howie wants to move off of his asking price and take a little bit less.
We mentioned Zach Ertz a little bit earlier when we were talking the tight ends, but I remember getting lambasted by Jody Mack. People like Ed Kracz and myself would tell Jody, look, the Eagles are trying to trade Zach Ertz. They're trying to trade Zach Ertz. And they didn't trade Zach Ertz. And Howie was really, really stubborn. And ultimately, when he had to trade him, when it finally came to the end of the road, he got Tay Gowan, and he got, I think it was a 5th-round pick. I think it was a 5th-round pick.
It was a 5th-round pick, yeah.
Not much for a player the caliber of Zach Ertz. Can you overplay I always joke that Howie wins every trade. Well, there's an example of You know, he doesn't win every trade, close to it, but if you push it too far with these types of players, and yeah, it's a little bit different. I mean, Zach is an aging player, very proven. Jalen Reagor hasn't proven anything. I think Andre Dillard has more value because while I agree with you, Ed, that he's only a left tackle, if you're a starter, that doesn't matter. And there's plenty of places he could start. Like Jason Kelsey's only a center. He told us that last week. His one play at guard didn't work out. But nobody talks about it because he's a center and he's an all-pro center. And he's not going to be asked to move anywhere else. That's only backups. Andre would be going somewhere in theory to start. Do you think Howie gets too stubborn with these veteran players that aren't going to be a big part of this team? So why not spin them off?
Yeah, you could say that. You could say he gets stubborn and he tries to get what he gets. And then, eventually you have to cut bait when that time comes. And I think with Ertz, it was kind of a favor to him also. I know they held him probably longer than Ertz would have liked. He would have liked to have been gone in the summer where he could get a full year with his new team. But, again, and Howie says this, he's not just going to give away good players. And, Dillard can be a starter in this league. I think a pretty successful one at left tackle. But nobody's beating down their door for a left tackle right now to start on their team. I mean, I don't know which teams need left tackles to step in at this point and start. Now, maybe in the summer that market will develop a little bit. And if it doesn't, then they just hang on to them. But the Eagles already lost one lineman in Nate Herbig. They had to release him after they took Cam Jurgens. And now if you get rid of another guy in Dillard, I mean, now your depth is kind of taking a little bit of a hit here. So they're not going to be quick to give him away. It's got to be a deal how he wants. And you could call it stubbornness or you could just call it being smart, really. I mean, he's just trying to play the field and explore what options are available. And if they trickle out and they want to move on at some point for less, then they'll do it. But there's no rush. There really isn't any rush to get rid of these guys.
John, I remember the conversations we did have last year at the opening of training camp about Zach Ertz and a potential trade. The reason why I kept bringing it up was I just got the feeling, and you knew better because you were down there, that the coach didn't necessarily want to trade.
No, coach loved him.
Because he's going out into practice and going, who are the two best guys we got catching the football? My tight end and my tight end. Why are we getting rid of one of these two guys when they're the two best guys I got catching the ball? I think that the coach and the general manager might have been on a slightly different page as to the value of Ertz and the timing of moving on from Ertz. So that's why I harped on it as much as I did last year. Let's talk about those wideouts. How important is it for Jalen Hurts leading up to the season? All these practices, we're going to have joint practices with other teams. They're not going to play in the preseason games. So all the limited workouts that they're going to have, are they going to be on the exact page week number one because they're buddies and they work out with nobody playing any defense on them during the summertime? A.J. Brown's got to hit the ground running and be the number one wide receiver on this team. Is that going to be the case, Ed Kracz?
Well, they were on the same page when they went to Atlanta last year, kind of taking a similar approach, and they blew out the Falcons. But the next 5 of their next 6 games, they didn't seem to be on the same page. They lost 5 of their next 6. But, I mean, we saw them come out of the gate last year fast. And this is year 2 with Sirianni. Maybe he knows a little bit better how to approach this, maybe make a few tweaks. I think they'll be fine. I mean, that seems to be the trend across the NFL where they have these joint practices where these teams get a lot of work in sort of a controlled environment. And then in the preseason game, they don't play anybody or they play them for a series. And that trying to manage their health so they're ready to go in week 1. And then they make tweaks as they go. I mean, we've said it before where, the first couple of weeks of an NFL season is almost kind of like training camp. An extended training camp while these guys work to get on the same page. So that's no different. But I like these joint practices. I think they're good. I think I like the work that gets done. John and I went to both last year in New York and against the Patriots here in Philadelphia. And, that it's good work. These guys get a lot of good work in a controlled environment. And then when the game comes, it's a shame for the fans that have to put the money out for these games because they're not going to see anybody. But yeah, I think when the season begins, it's always a work in progress for every team, no matter how you play your preseason or set up your training camps.
And it's going to be this year, it's going to be Berea, Ohio, and Miami Gardens, Florida. While I show up in Davie, thank God for Jody. I would have been in Davie, Florida. But the Dolphins opened their new training facility last year. And, I agree with you. Look, Nick Sirianni clearly values these joint practices for starters more than, and his key players as well, more than the preseason games. It doesn't matter where you get to work. If you get to work and you can control the environment in joint practices. In other words, if you're struggling in red zone, you can get together with the coaches and say, look, I need some red zone periods, and you can work on that. Whereas in a preseason game, you have to hope that just comes to fruition in the natural evolution of the game. So when it comes to sort of those reported players, underappreciated long shots, whatever you want to call them, we just talked about the 12-man depth chart at wide receiver. Do they have a more difficult time catching a coach's eye in this environment, do you think, Ed?
No, I don't think so. Not at all. I mean, there's cameras all over the place, and they're going to study what these guys do. And it is a controlled environment. If you're a coach and you say, hey, Carrick Wheatfall, he looked pretty good today, in the 5 plays that we ran for him. Let's up his count. Let's talk to the other coach and see if we can run maybe an additional 5 plays where we can get Carrick Wheatfall the ball. You have to just know your personnel, and you have to understand what you're seeing, and then you can get them the advanced reps. Like you say, like it's a controlled environment. So if you see somebody you want to see more of, then let's make it happen. Let's talk to the other coach. And like in preseason games, you're not going to get your goal line defense may not get 10 red zone snaps, whereas in these controlled environments, you can get your defense 10 red zone snaps, or your offense for that matter. Or in a game, you may not get any, or you might just get 2 or 3. So now you're really working on that part of your game, or because you can control the situation. And I would think it'd be the same way with a young player. If you're seeing something you like from a young guy, great. And they're still going to get the reps in a game, these young guys. So they're getting it reps in the practice, and then they're going to play in the game more than the starter. See, I think young guys have an ample amount of time to show what they can do.
All right. Speaking of young guys, I want to get your take on a guy who's going to be a second-year player this year, which still stamps him as a young guy, just not a rookie. Kenneth Gainwell. A lot of people believe this is going to be a quote-unquote breakout year for him. He did flash last year, but he also had games where he just wasn't a factor at all when Miles Sanders was healthy and Jordan Howard was going well and Boston Scott was scoring touchdowns. How do they expand the role of Kenneth Gainwell? Do you think they will expand the role of Kenneth Gainwell this year, Eddie?
I do. I think he will have an expanded role. Second year, they always like to talk about that jump between year 1 to year 2. Gainwell made a pretty costly mistake. I think it was in Vegas against the Raiders where he fumbled late in the first half, and that gave the Raiders another chance to score a touchdown, and the blowout was on from there. So, he was a rookie. So you hope that, he's going to make that jump, and I think they're going to get him the ball. I mean, you still have Miles Sanders. I think that they're going to work hard in this offense. But, Gainwell's going to be given a shot. And he was given a shot last year. Remember, that offense was just Sanders and Gainwell.
Yeah, for the first, really, until the Las Vegas game, as you mentioned, Ed.
Yeah.
And then Miles got hurt, and Jordan came in, and Boston came in, and you couldn't get them off the field because they played well. So I'll end it there with you, Kenny. Jody mentioned Kenny. And before I say that, read Ed at si.com/NFL/Eagles. Follow him on Twitter at KratzE. Jordan Howard's still out there. It's an annual tradition now, almost. When is he going to get the phone call? Is he going to get the phone call? He seems more valuable for the Eagles than any other team. There's no interest, but he's really effective when he's on the field for the Eagles. is he going to be back this year?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, Jason Huntley, I think they're going to give him a real chance. And, I kind of like this undrafted free agent they brought in from Oklahoma, Kennedy Brooks. I don't know what the future holds for him. Maybe he's a practice squad guy, but I just don't see, any room at this point for Jordan Howard. Now, if something happens to one of their backs as we go through the spring and then in training camp and he's still out there, then maybe they bring him in. But I think it's a numbers game for Jordan Howard at this point. I think they like, obviously, Boston Scott. They brought him back. Jason Huntley, I think, kind of flashed late in the season, flashed enough to think that, hey, maybe, we can find a role for him. And then you have Kennedy Brooks possibly as kind of maybe the practice squad guy who learns the game on the practice squad. And then what do you have for Jordan Howard? I mean, it's nothing but scraps. And I just don't see the Eagles going in that direction unless there's an injury that happens as the off season here goes on.
All right, last one for me, and this is for Ed, but also Johnny, if you want to chime in, because both of you guys will be involved today. I asked earlier about the offensive line potential deal. Could Andre Dillard be dealt? He wasn't dealt before the draft, before the season started. Same with Jalen Reagor, first-round draft pick. I, with tongue firmly implanted in cheek, asked about Aaron Sipas being available to you guys for media today. How about Gardner Minshew? His name got kicked around as a potential trade guy if they could get that much higher a pick than what they had to give up with him. Maybe they'd be willing to move Gardner Minshew. He and his mustache are still here. They didn't deal him anywhere. He is their backup quarterback right now. Is he a guy that you would like to talk to in any of these media availabilities? Do you think the Eagles will keep that out of your capabilities because they want to stick to where we believe in Jalen Hurts? Jalen is the guy narrative that they've been spinning all off season. Will you get a chance to talk to a Gardner Minshew before camp opens up?
Well, I would be very shocked if they made Gardner Minshew available, to be honest. I don't see it for a lot of reasons, and I think you touched on some of them there, Jody. But he was a guy I thought was going to get traded before the draft or after or during the draft, and the Eagles would take a quarterback. And I just don't see how you can part ways with him now because he's really your experienced guy. If something were to happen to Hurts, then you're turning over the backup role to, Reed Sinnett or Carson Strong, and that's not a good plan for anybody. I don't think so. I just don't see how they make trade Minshew, and I just don't see how they make him available to talk to us at all.
It would be, and this is where it hurts because you could just grab him coming off the practice field in the old days, and and by the way, the Eagles aren't concerned about Jalen Hurts in that aspect. I mean, he's the guy here. And Nick already mentioned last year, remember when Gardner had the big game against the Jets and everybody said, oh, it's the Jets. Even Jody, a Jets fan, would say, it's the Jets.
It was the Jets. Bad defense.
But he played really, really well. And Gardner went into Nick's office and said, look, what do I got to do to be the starter on this team? And Nick was like, you're not going to be the starter on this team.
Yeah,
so
do a Nancy Kerrigan on our starting quarterback's leg is the only way you're getting in as the starter there, Gardner.
So I don't think they're worried about Jalen Hurts from that perspective. But, it's I'd like to talk to a lot of these guys, but we're still in the post COVID world, which is a little bit pre-COVID, and it stinks, to be honest. And there's a lot of good stories left hanging on the vine, Ed, because we can't talk to these guys. It's depressing in a way.
Yeah, it's a shame. And like I said, when I started, I'm not sure how much the readers want to read about these guys, but I certainly like to write stories about underdogs and kind of off the beaten track type players that are still trying to fight for an opportunity to to make a life in the NFL. And, we're just not going to get those stories until we get a chance to get them coming off the field or get them back in the locker room. Who knows if that'll ever happen again. But, look, we take what we get and, try to turn lemonade out of lemons or something, whatever that saying is, but yeah, I mean, it's a shame. But, yeah, I don't think they're worried about Hurts, his mind being the guy. But you have to think, like, what if he gets hurt? what if?
And by the way, I think Gardner Minshew is a really good backup quarterback. I think he's a really good backup quarterback. Top 5 backup quarterback in the NFL, I would say.
He's solid, but he was out there with the other JV players week 18 against the Dallas Cowboys. It wasn't as good as he was against the Jets. Cowboys defense a little bit better than the Jets defense.
Slightly.
We'll acknowledge that. All right, Eddie K. Johnny will be talking to you later on in the afternoon. Enjoy the player availability. We'll get you up here in a couple weeks again on Birds 365.
Thanks, guys. Have a good one.
Thanks, Ed.